The restaurant was buzzing with clinking glasses and too loud laughter. But at our long table, I felt like a prop in a play I didn't audition for. My sister leaned across the white tablecloth, her diamond bracelet catching the candlelight, and said, "I don't know how you manage in that shoebox of a house." My brother chimed in before I could breathe, laughing so hard the waiter looked over. "She probably lives on microwave noodles and instant coffee. Breakfast at her place must be a comedy show." Their words stuck to my skin like grease, impossible to wash away. My parents smiled politely, not defending me, as if cruelty disguised as humor was still acceptable. I pushed my fork around the plate, the taste of food gone my cheeks hot. I kept wondering why the family I'd once baked birthday cakes for now measured my worth by square footage and brand names. In my mind, I pictured my chipped blue mug waiting at home on the counter, the one I drank from every morning. When had something so ordinary turned into a symbol of shame? I swallowed, blinked hard, and the thought came like a whisper. Why do they need to belittle me just to feel whole? Before I continue, let me pause and ask you, where are you watching from tonight? Go ahead and write your city in the comments. And if you've ever felt small at a table where you should have been safe tap, like to show you, understand and subscribe so you don't miss the rest of what happened after that night. This story goes places I never expected. I wasn't born to a cruel family, or at least that's not how it started. I grew up in a 2-story colonial house with blue shutters, the kind where neighbors waved from their porches. We weren't wealthy, but we weren't poor either. I was the middle child, quiet bookish, the one who liked to sit cross-legged on the living room rug with a library book, instead of running wild outside. My sister, glamorous from the start, loved attention and found ways to get it. My brother was loud, competitive, always boasting, even when we were children. That pattern never left us. My sister married a wealthy man who bought her jewelry for anniversaries and cars for birthdays. My brother poured his money into loud engines and shiny rims, bragging at every gathering about his next investment. My parents, maybe tired from years of refereeing, let them dominate. They never quite knew how to lift me up, though I rarely asked for it. I built a quieter life, a job at the town library shelves, to organize story hours with children, book clubs with retirees. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. After my divorce, I bought a small bungalow with a creaking porch, a place where the morning light fell through lace curtains. Every day, I began with a ritual: scrambled eggs, a single flower in a bud vase, and coffee in my chipped blue mug. That little scene, repeated daily, held me steady. Still, when family gatherings came, my smallness seemed to offend them. They measured worth by noise and glitter, not by peace or persistence. The only one who never joined their chorus was Grandpa. At 78, he'd grown quieter with the years. He wore cardigans, even in summer, tipped his cap at neighbors, and listened more than he spoke. At dinners, he often sat silent eyes, watchful, as though measuring what words did to the people who heard them. He was there that night, too, his fork moving slowly, his gaze settling on me when the laughter turned sharp. He didn't speak. Not then. That dinner played out like a stage performance I hadn't rehearsed for. The chandeliers above us glowed with polished light, their glass droplets catching every gesture, every laugh, every flicker of expression. The waiter moved gracefully, setting bowls of pasta, heavy with sauce baskets of bread that smelled of rosemary plates, arranged like artwork. But taste was lost on me. My mouth was too dry to enjoy any of it. What I remember clearly is how invisible I felt at that long table. When I tried to mention a new children's program at the library, how we'd helped a shy boy read his first paragraph out loud, my words barely hit the air before my sister interrupted. She leaned back, her necklace sparkling, and said, "That's adorable, like a hobby project." Her smile was thin, like glass about to crack. My brother laughed loud enough for the next table to glance our way. Meanwhile, I closed 2 real estate deals this week. Guess which one pays the bills? Their voices layered over mine until I fell quiet. My father wanted to hear about my brother's new car. My mother leaned toward my sister to ask about the vacation in Italy. No one asked me anything. I thought of the books waiting on my desk at the library, of the joy in sorting them into order, and wondered why those quiet triumphs seemed so meaningless in their world. Then came the sharper cuts. "Her house is barely big enough for a chair," my sister said, sipping wine. My brother added, "She probably survives on boxed dinners. I wouldn't trust her to boil water." Laughter rose again, and this time even my parents smiled. Their amusement felt like betrayal. I swallowed hard, trying not to show how much it stung. And across the table, Grandpa sat with his fork still watching silently. He didn't smile. His eyes, calm but steady, stayed on me, as if anchoring me in the storm. I wondered why he didn't speak, but part of me knew sometimes silence carried its own weight. By the time dessert came, a rich chocolate cake cut into thick slices, I couldn't take another bite. My appetite had vanished long before. I excused myself, claiming fatigue. They barely looked up as I left. Outside, the night air smelled of rain on pavement, a relief compared to the heaviness I'd left behind. When I unlocked the door and stepped inside, the quiet hit me in a way I hadn't expected. Not the soothing quiet of safety, but the heavy, echoing silence of absence. The house was tidy, almost too tidy, as if no one really lived here. I set my shoes neatly by the mat, even though I wanted to kick them off and collapse. The refrigerator hummed, with a low, steady vibration that reminded me of my own heart there, functioning, but carrying weight. I opened the container with restaurant leftovers and slid it onto the middle shelf. The smell of garlic and butter rose, but it turned my stomach. I closed the door and leaned against it, letting the cool metal steady me. Across the kitchen counter, the chipped blue mug waited, simple and familiar. I filled the kettle and lit the burner. The hiss of gas, the rush of flame, it was ordinary but grounding. When the kettle whistled, I poured hot water over a tea bag, steam curling upward like a secret rising from the cup. I sat at the small wooden table, the mug warm against my palms. My gaze drifted toward the empty vase in the center glass, catching faint light from the lamp. Normally, there would be a flower there, daisy, carnation, anything small. Tonight, it was bare. That emptiness hurt more than the laughter from the restaurant. As I drank, my memory pulled me back to another kitchen long ago. I was 10, maybe 11. Grandpa's voice still lived there. "Patience makes eggs tender. Stir slowly, don't hurry them. Cooking is a conversation, not a race." He'd stood beside me, one hand guiding mine as I clutched the wooden spoon. I'd felt safe, seen, important. That memory had stayed intact, untouched by the years that followed. Now I sat alone, the chipped mug against my lips, and the thought came uninvited. Why do I keep letting them make me small? The question echoed louder in the silence. I stared at the empty vase again, realizing how much of myself I'd hidden away. I carried myself through each day quietly, dutifully, but without demanding space. Tonight, that choice had cost me. The laughter of my family still rang in my ears, but beneath it, another sound grew, the quiet but steady insistence that I was worth more than their ridicule. I carried that thought with me into bed sheets, cool against my skin, the night pressing in. Sleep came late, heavy and dreamless. The morning crept in, pale and hesitant, a thin line of gold edging the curtains. My head was heavy from restless sleep, the kind where laughter from the night before keeps replaying like a broken record. I had just swung my legs over the side of the bed when the phone rang. The sound startled me. It was rare that anyone called this early. My first thought was that something had gone wrong. When I picked up, I heard Grandpa's voice low and deliberate. "Morning, sweetheart. Mind if I stop by for breakfast?" For a second, I thought I misheard. He had never called me to ask for anything. He was the kind of man who avoided being a burden even to family. My voice came out too fast, betraying my surprise. "Of course, yes. Please do." I caught myself and added softer. "I'd like that." The moment I hung up, the air in the house seemed to shift. A nervous energy filled me, equal parts panic and anticipation. I looked around my small kitchen with critical eyes. The counter was tidy, but suddenly I wanted it to shine. I wiped it twice, polished the table, straightened the chairs. I opened the fridge, scanning what I had: a carton of eggs, milk, fresh bread from yesterday, strawberries I'd picked up on sale, coffee beans ready to grind. It wasn't luxury food, but it was honest. I moved deliberately. Cracked the eggs into a bowl, whisked them with a fork, sprinkled a pinch of salt. Sliced the strawberries, their juice brightening my fingertips. Put the bread in the toaster, listening to the hum. The smell of coffee soon filled the air, rich and grounding. I set the table with quiet care. 2 places, one across from the other. I chose a plain white mug for him, my chipped blue mug for myself. For a moment, I considered hiding it using the matching white mug from the cupboard instead, but I decided against it. That mug was me, ordinary, imperfect, but constant. On the windowsill, I spotted a single daisy pushing through a jar I'd left there. I cut the stem and placed it in the small vase at the center of the table. The effect was simple but intentional, and my heart thudded harder than it had in years. I paused, staring at the table, realizing this wasn't about impressing anyone. It was about finally allowing someone to see the truth of my life, plain, unpolished, but real. The doorbell rang. I wiped my palms on a towel, inhaled deeply, and opened the door to find Grandpa standing there in his wool cap, sunlight spilling across his shoulders. He stepped inside, slowly glancing around as though he wanted to absorb every detail. His eyes lingered on the bookshelf, the framed photos of my children's story hours at the library, the lace curtains moving in the breeze. "It's cozy here," he said, his voice calm, his eyes kind. Those 3 words washed over me like balm. I guided him to the table. He lowered himself into the chair, carefully set his cap on his knee, and lifted the fork. He tasted the eggs, first chewing with patience. Then he looked at me and nodded once. Tender. "You remembered what I taught you." My smile spread slowly, warming me from the inside. We talked. At first, small things: how the neighborhood had changed the weather, the garden he still tended, though his knees ached. Then deeper things: my work at the library, how the children came shy and left a little braver, how I found comfort in organizing shelves that most people ignored. He listened, truly, listened, his gaze steady. Between bites, he asked about my childhood memory of reading under the porch light about the summer. I fell off my bike, and he carried me home. Each question reached into places the rest of the family never touched. I told him about the new book club for veterans, the way they laughed together after years of silence. He chuckled softly, saying, "You give more than you think." The kitchen filled with a sense of ease I hadn't felt in months. The sunlight slanted across the table, catching the rim of my blue mug, making the small chip glint like a silver crescent. I lifted it and sipped slowly, savoring the moment. Then the knock at the door. It was sharp, unexpected. I froze, spatula in hand pulse quickening. Through the window, I saw them: my sister in her sleek car, my brother climbing from his truck, my parents following behind. My stomach tightened. They hadn't called, hadn't warned. When I opened the door, my sister smiled too brightly. "We were nearby," she said, voice sweetened with something that wasn't kindness. thought we'd dropped something off." Her eyes swept past me into the kitchen, widening at the sight of Grandpa at my table, coffee steaming daisy in a vase. My brother raised his brows, smirk, tugging his lips ready with a comment. My parents stood still, uncertain. The air grew heavier, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath. The moment the front door clicked shut behind my sister, the air shifted like a current pulling against the room. My family stood in the entryway, their perfume and cologne mingling with the smell of eggs and coffee, their eyes roaming over the small space as though measuring it against their own homes. My sister's gaze lingered on the modest curtains, the mismatched chairs, the single flower in the vase. She lifted her chin, lips pressed in the kind of smile that had always disguised judgment. My brother's eyes landed on my blue mug. He smirked, opening his mouth to speak, no doubt ready, with another joke about my so-called microwave life. But before he could, Grandpa's voice cut through the silence stronger than I had heard it in years. "This," he said, setting down his fork with deliberate weight, "is the best meal I've had in months." His words stopped them cold. He paused, letting the statement hang, before leaning forward slightly, eyes sharp with clarity. Not because of the eggs, though they're tender and done right. Not because of the coffee, though it's strong the way I like it. But because of the peace in this house. Because of the sincerity in every gesture. That's something money cannot buy, and laughter cannot erase. My sister blinked, caught off guard, the practiced glow in her face flickering like a light about to go out. My brother shifted his weight, his shoulders no longer squared with confidence, but sloping inward as though the walls themselves pressed back. My parents looked at each other, uncertainty rising, where amusement had been the night before. Grandpa didn't stop. His voice gathered strength, like a tide rolling in. "You laughed at her last night. You thought cruelty was a joke worth sharing, but you forgot that dignity does not live in chandeliers or vacations or jewelry. It lives here in the patience to scramble eggs slowly, in the courage to sit alone and still open her door when family comes." His eyes flicked to each of them in turn, sharp as glass. "You mocked what you didn't understand, and I won't sit silent anymore." The silence that followed wasn't the comfortable kind. It was heavy, pressing into the corners, making even the air seem ashamed. My sister set her purse down on the entry table without realizing, her hands trembling slightly. My brother cleared his throat, searching for words but finding none. My father's mouth opened, then closed, as if speech had deserted him. My mother's eyes watered, though whether from shame or sudden clarity, I couldn't tell. Grandpa pushed back his chair slowly, the scrape of the legs against the floor sounding like thunder in the stillness. He pointed not with accusation, but with the certainty of someone who had lived long enough to know what mattered. Noise fades, flash fades, even wealth fades, but the way you treat one another, that stays. And you will remember this morning long after your jokes have turned sour. No one moved. The sunlight streamed in through the lace curtains, catching the rim of my chipped blue mug and turning the flaw into a kind of crown. For the first time in years, I felt the weight lift off my shoulders, not because I had spoken, but because someone who mattered had spoken for me. My sister tried weakly to laugh. "It was just teasing," she said, her voice thin. But Grandpa cut her off with a look so steady, she fell silent mid-sentence. My brother shoved his hands into his pockets, muttering something about being late, though he didn't leave. My parents stood frozen, absorbing the words as if they were hearing the truth for the very first time. And then Grandpa did something none of us expected. He lifted my blue mug, the one chipped at the rim, the one they had mocked without knowing, and held it up to the light. "This," he said, his voice steady, "is more honest than all your polished silver. It has lasted through years of mornings, through disappointments, and through hope. It may not be perfect, but it has never pretended to be anything other than what it is, and that's why it matters." The mug gleamed in his hand like a relic suddenly more powerful than crystal glass or fine china. My sister's face paled. My brother looked away. My mother's lips trembled. My father's shoulders sagged as though decades of unspoken truths had just landed on him. I sat there, my hands folded in my lap, my heart pounding but calm. I didn't need to add a word. The revelation had already arrived loud as thunder in a quiet kitchen. Finally, my sister mumbled something about needing to go. My brother muttered agreement. My parents trailed after them, subdued their footsteps strangely small on the wooden floor. No sharp retorts, no clever remarks. Just silence, raw and heavy. The door closed, and with it the storm they carried. The house returned to stillness. Only the smell of coffee lingered, and the faint sound of birdsong through the window. Grandpa set the mug back down gently and looked at me. His eyes were calm again, but there was steel in them too. The kind of steel that only truth could forge. Grandpa and I lingered at the table long after the front door closed behind the rest of my family. The house seemed to exhale, releasing the tension they had carried in with them. Sunlight filtered through the curtains, making small patterns on the tablecloth, and I realized for the first time in a long while that silence could be a companion instead of a punishment. He lifted his cup, took another slow sip, and said nothing at first. I followed his lead, letting the warmth of my coffee travel through me. Finally, his voice broke the quiet steady and unhurried. "Never let them measure you by noise," he said, his gaze resting on me. "Silence has its strength." The words landed softly but deeply, as though they had been waiting for years to be spoken. I felt something loosen in my chest, a knot that had lived there through countless dinners, holidays, and gatherings where I had been the butt of a joke or the shadow in the corner. Tears stung my eyes, but not from sadness. It was recognition. It was relief. I thought about the night before, the laughter that had sliced through me like glass, the humiliations disguised as casual comments, the way I had driven home in the dark, convinced of my smallness. And now, here he was, sitting in my kitchen, calling this modest breakfast the best meal he had tasted in months. Not because of extravagance, but because of peace. Because here, in this little house, I had created something honest. As we finished our eggs, he asked me again about my work. I told him of the children who came shy and uncertain, their voices barely audible at first. How slowly, week by week, they learned to pronounce words with confidence. How their eyes brightened when they realized they had said something clearly for the first time. "It sounds to me like you give them more than reading," he said. "You give them belief." His words wrapped around me, gentle and affirming. I realized I had spent so much time comparing myself to the loud successes of my siblings that I had overlooked the quiet successes in front of me every day. The children's laughter at the library, the neighbor who stopped by just to thank me for recommending a book that kept her company through a lonely winter, the satisfaction of turning a key in the lock of a house that was mine alone. These moments didn't sparkle like jewelry, but they endured like stone. When Grandpa pushed his chair back, he moved slowly, as though reluctant to disturb the calm that had settled between us. "You know," he said, putting on his cap, "kindness leaves longer echoes than cruelty. They may not admit it today, but they heard me, and they saw you." I walked him to the door, my heart lighter than it had been in months. As he stepped onto the porch, he turned once more and gave me a nod that said more than words. It was the kind of nod a craftsman gives when he knows a job is done well. When the door closed behind him, I stood for a moment in the stillness. The house no longer felt small. The rooms once filled with echoes of doubt now felt like they held me firmly. I carried the dishes to the sink and washed them slowly, almost ceremoniously. Each plate, each fork, each glass became part of a rhythm that calmed me. When I came to the blue mug, I lingered. I ran the towel carefully around its rim, over the chip that had so often embarrassed me. But today, that imperfection looked different. It wasn't a flaw. It was a sign of endurance, of mornings survived, of resilience in small routines. I placed it back on the shelf with deliberate care, as if crowning it a treasure. Later, as the afternoon light stretched long across the floor, I sat by the window and thought about how life had cornered me into believing worth must be shouted, flaunted, or bought. Yet in truth, it was the quiet rituals that sustained me. The eggs scrambled patiently, the flower in the vase, even if it was just a daisy from the yard. The chipped mug filled and emptied countless times. These were not signs of failure, they were proof of survival, proof of dignity. That night, when I lay down to sleep, I didn't replay the cruel laughter. I replayed Grandpa's words instead. I imagined them like stones dropped into a pond, their ripples reaching further than I could see. Maybe one day my sister would remember the way her bracelet looked gaudy in the sunlight of my kitchen. Maybe my brother would hear in his own jokes the hollowness they carried. Maybe my parents, though silent now, would sit in their living room and wonder why his words had stung them more than mine ever could. I didn't need their change to validate me. I had already been validated. I drifted to sleep with a strange, quiet smile, one I hadn't worn in years. In the days that followed, I returned to my routines with a steadier heart. At the library, I watched children stumble through sentences and cheered when they made it to the end. I recommended books that might become someone's salvation in a lonely night. I came home to my bungalow and found comfort in its familiarity. And each morning, when I lifted the blue mug, I remembered not the jokes, but the moment it glinted in sunlight, while my family sat silenced by truth. I no longer wondered if I was enough. I knew I was. And now, I want to leave you with this. Have you ever had a moment when someone you loved reminded you of your worth even when others tried to erase it? What small ritual, what ordinary object keeps you grounded in who you really are? Share your story in the comments. I would love to read it. If this story touched something in you, please like this video, subscribe so you don't miss the next one, and share it with someone who might need to hear that dignity can live quietly in a chipped mug and a small house. Thank you for spending this time with me. May your mornings be gentle, your nights peaceful, and may you always know that who you are, without noise, without show, is already enough.